In today's video, I'll be ranking all 14 sequences in Assassin's Creed 2 from worst to best, and I ain't gonna lie, it was really hard because most of the sequences are pretty good. Please keep in mind though that this is just my opinion, and I welcome you to share your own opinion in the comments. Also, before I begin, I just want to say that almost 98% of those who view my videos are not subscribed, so if at any point you enjoyed the video or want to see more Assassin's Creed content, then please consider subscribing to the channel. It's free, it takes only a second, and it's greatly appreciated. Anyway, with that said, let us begin with my least favourite sequence. My least favourite part of the game has to be sequence 13. Every time I revisit the game, sequence 13 always feels like a tedious hurdle that I need to push through rather than something I look forward to. The sequence begins with Ezio returning to Florence after being stabbed by Cecco Orsi in his desperate attempt to recover the Apple of Eden. Ezio ultimately loses the relic to Girolamo Savonarola, a monk who then uses its power to seize influence over the city. To counter this, Ezio works with La Volpe, Paola and Machiavelli to inspire the citizens to revolt, whilst he is given the task of eliminating 9 of Savonarola's key supporters. This is where the sequence loses me. The 9 assassinations, while important narratively, are repetitive and lack the creativity seen in earlier sequences. The targets themselves aren't especially memorable, and the missions feel more like filler than meaningful challenges. As a result, what should feel like a major moment in Ezio's journey instead becomes a drawn-out grind. That said though, the sequence isn't entirely without merit. Every chapter in this game has its strengths, and for sequence 13 it's Ezio's closing speech that stands out as its highlight. His words capture the heart of the Assassin's Creed philosophy and offer a powerful moment of reflection. Unfortunately, aside from that speech, the rest of the sequence just doesn't land for me, leaving it as one of the weakest and most uninteresting parts of the game. Sequence 10 is another part of the game that suffers from repetitiveness, relying too heavily on the simple formula of moving from point A to fight a group of enemies, then heading to point B to do much of the same. It's a shame because this is the sequence where we're introduced to one of the most memorable characters in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Bartolomeo di Alviano. Despite his larger-than-life personality, I always felt that Bartolomeo was underutilised compared to the other allies like Paola and La Volpe. He spends much of this game pushed into the background, though thankfully his potential was recognised and he was given a far more prominent role in the sequel. The sequence begins with Ezio speaking to Antonio, where it is revealed that Silvio Barbarigo has seized control of L'Arsenal and is battling to maintain his grip on the docks. Ezio then seeks out Bartolomeo, rescues him from a cage and escorts him back to a base while fending off scattered enemy attacks along the way. The following memories largely repeat this structure. In one, Ezio frees more mercenaries from cages, and in another, he pushes through fights to secure positions for his forces. The missions lack variety, and while the setup is logical, it never feels engaging or very creative. I can't help but imagine how much more memorable this sequence could have been if it had played out differently. For instance, instead of repeated rescue missions, Ezio might have used the mercenaries as a distraction while sneaking aboard Silvio and Dante's ship. Once at sea, away from the safety of Venice, Ezio could then strike in a confined, high-stakes battle on the open water. That would have been a far more striking and unique way to conclude the storyline. Unfortunately, the assassination we do get is rather bland. Silvio and Dante simply flee, leading to either a chase and assassinate scenario or a straightforward fight, neither of which leaves much of an impression. Compared to other sequences in the game, sequence 10 ultimately feels lackluster and forgettable, falling short of the impact it could have delivered. This sequence picks up right after the events of Venice, with Ezio heading to Forli and then having to assist Caterina Sforza. The city is under siege from the Orsi brothers, mercenaries who are after the Apple of Eden, and a map of the remaining codex pages. Things escalate quickly and Ezio gets caught in the middle of defending Forli, protecting Caterina's children and ultimately recovering the apple. Now, while this sequence does have its moments, I have to be honest, it's never been one of my favourites. A big reason for that is the heavy emphasis on combat. Assassin's Creed shines the most, at least for me, when it leans into stealth, blending into crowds and assassinations. However, sequence 12 throws most of that out of the window and just tosses Ezio into wave after wave of open fighting. And since this is set in Forli, which is already my least favourite location in the game, the backdrop doesn't really do this sequence any favours. Then there are the Orsi brothers themselves. Compared to someone like Rodrigo Borgia or even Francesco de Pazzi, the Orsi brothers lack depth. They're loud and violent, sure, but not particularly memorable. That said, I don't think sequence 12 is a complete wash. The rescue mission with Caterina's children is generally one of the highlights. It adds real stakes and some sense of emotion to the chaos. On top of that, Caterina's fiery personality and sharp dialogue bring some much needed added energy to the sequence. She's one of the few side characters who have some sort of presence, and her moments here really do stand out. So overall, while I don't hate Sequence 12, it falls into that middle ground where the good is outweighed by the tedious combat and weak villains. Next up is Sequence 6. This is a pretty short sequence, but it does pack in some memorable moments. The plot here follows Ezio as he and Leonardo make their way to Forli. Along the road, the two run into trouble as Rodrigo Borgia's men ambush them. This sequence also introduces us to Caterina Sforza, who's quick to make an impression with her sharp tongue and bold personality. What I really like most about this sequence is that despite its length, it gives us some standout moments. First and foremost is Memory 2, the carriage escape with Leonardo. This mission is unlike anything else in Assassin's Creed 2. You're literally fending off attackers while trying to keep the carriage from tipping over. And while the controls are a little clunky by today's standards, it is still quite fun when you get to it. It's easily one of the most unique missions in the game. Another highlight is Caterina's introduction. She doesn't hold back, and her dialogue instantly establishes her as a strong, fiery character. Right from the start, you get a sense that she's going to play an important role in Ezio's journey, and on top of that, having Leonardo and Ezio together is always an interesting time. Their chemistry is great, and seeing them as a duo adds a layer of comedy and levity to the story. The downside to all of this though is just how short the sequence is. It barely gives you enough time to settle in before it's over. Sequence 6 is still memorable for the carriage mission, Caterina's entrance, and that ever fun Ezio and Leonardo partnership. It just leaves me wishing there was more of it. At number 10, we have the final sequence of Assassin's Creed 2. This is the big finale where Ezio finally confronts Rodrigo Borgia and ties together the mystery of the Codex pages. After piecing together the Codex wall, Ezio infiltrates the Sistine Chapel, confronts Rodrigo, and the game builds to its grand ending inside the Vault of Minerva. Now let's start with the good, because Sequence 14 absolutely has some standout moments. The set pieces in the Sistine Chapel are visually striking, and sneaking through such an iconic location makes the mission feel truly cinematic. Then there's the boss fight itself, specifically the first phase where you have to fight Rodrigo whilst being aided with the clones of Ezio. It's a really creative twist that stands out compared to anything else in the game. And of course, the biggest highlight is the ending cutscene with Minerva. That jaw-dropping reveal, breaking the fourth wall and addressing Desmond directly, is easily one of the most memorable moments in the entire franchise. But for all the highs, there are some things I'm not a fan of. The Codex wall puzzle at the start is one of them. Don't get me wrong, it's clever, but every time I play, it takes me way longer than it should. I know, it's probably just a skill issue, but still. Then there's the journey to Rodrigo, which just feels like filler. You're hacking your way through wave after wave of guards, and whilst it's not the worst thing in the world, it makes the lead up drag and doesn't make much sense, because surely all the fighting and loud noises would get the attention of other guards and eventually Rodrigo would find out about it. And lastly, something that has always bugged me, you can't actually reach Rodrigo with perfect stealth. For a game that emphasises stealthy assassinations, being forced into open conflict here feels a little disappointing. So overall, Sequence 14 nails the spectacle and delivers one of the series' most unforgettable endings, but the slog to get there holds it back from ranking higher. At number 9, we have Sequence 11. This sequence starts when the ship carrying the Apple of Eden returns from Cyprus. Ezio then tells a guard and then disguises himself to be able to get close to Rodrigo. Eventually, he drops the disguise and challenges Rodrigo directly, but things don't go quite to plan because Rodrigo ends up escaping once again. And honestly, the last cutscene is the best part of this sequence. Seeing all of the friends and allies that Ezio has gathered along the way come together to officially initiate him into the Brotherhood feels earned. It's a payoff for everything he's been through up to this point, and solidifies that Ezio isn't just some lone avenger anymore. He's truly part of something bigger. It's also pretty memorable because it is at this point Ezio meets Machiavelli and learns that he himself is the prophet. Unfortunately, the sequence itself doesn't quite live up to that ending. It's way too short, feeling more like a transition than a full chapter in Ezio's story. On top of that, most of the actual gameplay boils down to a tailing mission and combat. Not the worst thing in the world, but compared to some of the more creative or varied sequences, Sequence 11 feels pretty bare bones. This sequence is all about Ezio tying up the aftermath of the Pazzi conspiracy by hunting down the remaining conspirators one by one. Over the course of the sequence, you track and assassinate Antonio Maffei, Francesco Salviati, Bernardo Baroncelli, and Stefano Baglione. Each of these targets played a role in the conspiracy, and Ezio methodically eliminates them all. The sequence culminates with Jacopo de Pazzi, who seems like the final loose end. only for Rodrigo Borgia himself to show up and kill Jacopo, revealing that Ezio's real enemy is much bigger than the Pazzi family. What I really like about this sequence is the focus on assassinations. This feels more in line with the core fantasy of being an assassin, studying your targets, finding the right moment and taking them out. And of course, the Jacopo scene at the end is easily one of the most memorable moments in the game. Seeing Rodrigo betray and kill him not only cements Rodrigo as a ruthless villain, but also shifts the story's scale, letting Ezio and the player know the real mastermind he'll be up against moving forward. But as strong as those moments are, Loose Ends does have its weaknesses. For one thing, 2 of the missions are literally just cutscenes, and one is basically a tutorial, which makes the pacing feel uneven. On top of that, while there are multiple assassinations, they're all pretty basic in design and all take place in San Gimignano. Having every target in the same city makes the sequence a bit repetitive, and it doesn't really push the gameplay variety the way later sequences do. At number 7, we've got Sequence 3. This sequence is where Ezio really starts to embrace the assassin's path. After the death of his family, he allies with his uncle Mario and learns the skills he'll need to survive. Much of the early part of this sequence is spent training in Monteregione, getting to grips with new weapons and mechanics. The sequence builds to a showdown outside San Gimignano, where Ezio finally takes his revenge and kills Vieri. The story then pivots as Ezio discovers that Vieri wasn't acting alone. He was part of a much bigger conspiracy, revealed in a meeting of the Pazzi conspirators. There is a lot I like about this sequence. Seeing Ezio change and start to channel his anger is really powerful, especially in the fight against Vieri, who's been a thorn in Ezio's side since the beginning. The final mission of the sequence is fun and cinematic, giving you a proper rival showdown, and the cutscene of the conspirators meeting is great. It raises more questions than answers, showing that Ezio's enemies are far more powerful and organised than he realised. However, the negatives is that the start is heavily tutorial based. While Ubisoft did a great job of weaving story into the training missions, it does make replays a bit frustrating, since you already know the basics and just want to move on. Another small gripe is the lack of choice in how you assassinate Vieri. The fight is scripted to be a big confrontation, which makes sense narratively, but part of me really wishes there was an option to take him out with pure stealth. It would have just been satisfying to have that freedom. At number 6, we have Sequence 1, Ignorance is Bliss. This opening sequence does a great job of easing you into Ezio's world. It introduces you to Renaissance Florence and lets you experience Ezio's life before everything falls apart. You spend time with his brother Federico in some light-hearted races and fights, and even sneak into Christina's house for a little romance. It's all framed against a backdrop of growing tension, giving just enough hints that something bigger is going on beneath the surface. What I really like about this sequence is its simplicity. It doesn't overwhelm you with complex systems or heavy plot beats right away, but it still builds intrigue. You just know something is brewing, and that makes the calm moments more meaningful. I also love how it establishes Ezio's relationships right from the start. His bond with Federico is warm and playful, Christina shows a more vulnerable side to him, and Duccio, well, he's the perfect scumbag to punch in the face. All of this helps you connect to Ezio as a person before he becomes an assassin. As for what I don't like, honestly not much. I think it's a fantastic opening. The only reason it's not ranked higher is simply because the later sequences add more variety, bigger set pieces and more engaging missions. Compared to those, Sequence 1 feels smaller in scale, but that's what makes it such a strong introduction. At number 5, we've got Sequence 7, The Merchant of Venice. This is where Ezio and Leonardo finally make their way into Venice, and the game opens up one of its most iconic locations. Right from the start, Ezio gets pulled into the conflict when he helps Rosa, a thief who's been injured whilst escaping the guards. After getting her through the city to safety, Ezio is introduced to Antonio and the Thieves Guild. From there, you work with the thieves to weaken Emilio Barbarigo's hold on the city, leading up to the big finale, assassinating Emilio during a meeting with a fellow Templar. The introduction is fantastic. The mission where you help Rosa to safety stands out as one of the most memorable moments in Venice, blending action with a bit of emotional weight. I also really enjoy Rosa and Antonio as characters. They add some personality and energy to the Thieves Guild, and their dynamic with Ezio is fun to watch. On top of that, the assassination mission itself is pretty solid. The setup is sneaking into Emilio's palace and pulling off the kill. But for all that good, there's one big downside: Emilio himself. As a Templar target, he's easily the most boring and lackluster one in the entire game. He doesn't have the presence of someone like Francesco or the menace of Marco. He's just kind of there. When you finally assassinate him, it doesn't feel like much of a payoff because there was never much build up to him as a character. At number 4 we have Sequence 2, Escape Plans. This is the point in Assassin's Creed 2 where Ezio's world completely changes. After the betrayal and execution of his father and brothers, Ezio is forced to flee with what's left of his family. Along the way, he receives guidance from Paola, who teaches him vital assassin skills like blending into crowds and moving unseen. With those lessons under his belt, Ezio hunts down Uberto Alberti, the man responsible for betraying his family, and assassinates him before finally fleeing Florence. The assassination of Uberto is one of the most memorable kills in the game, not because Uberto is a great target, but because of how Ezio executes it. Instead of the clean, efficient strike of a trained assassin, Ezio stabs him over and over in raw anger. It perfectly shows just how unrefined and inexperienced he still is, and it's a powerful moment for his character. I also really like how the tutorials are woven into the narrative. Paola teaching Ezio how to blend, pickpocket, and use stealth doesn't feel like game mechanics being dumped on you. It feels like part of his growth. As for negatives, honestly nothing major. Escape Plans is a fantastic sequence. The only reason it isn't higher is because I simply enjoy the later sequences more. They expand the world, introduce bigger set pieces, and push the story forward in ways that edge this one out. At number 3 we've got Sequence 9, Carnivale. This one is one of the most stylish and unique chapters in Assassin's Creed 2, set during Venice's famous Carnivale. The sequence begins with Ezio unlocking a brand new weapon, the hidden gun, giving him another tool to take out targets from a distance. Soon after, there's a shocking scene in a brothel where a woman is killed, and Ezio is forced to use the hidden gun for the first time. From there, the story shifts gears as Ezio takes part in the carnival games, competing for the golden mask that will grant him access to Marco Barbarigo's party. Unfortunately, despite winning, the mask is handed to Dante Moreau instead, and Ezio is left to find another way in. The sequence ends with Ezio assassinating Marco in dramatic fashion, blending in with the crowd and using that new hidden gun to strike. First off, the setting is fantastic. The fireworks, the masquerade vibe, and the lively streets of Venice during the Carnivale give this chapter a really distinct atmosphere. The games themselves are a fun change of pace, different from anything else in the story, and a creative way to build tension before the assassination. And that assassination is one of the most memorable in the whole game. Blending into the crowd and pulling out the hidden gun to take down Marco is such a stylish moment, perfectly tying the new weapon into the narrative. As for what I don't like, honestly, again, nothing major. Just like Sequence 2, the only reason Carnivale isn't ranked higher is because I personally enjoy the remaining sequences more. This sequence kicks off with Ezio tailing a group of Templars to eavesdrop on their meeting, giving us some valuable insight into their plans. After that, Ezio teams up with Antonio to scout the Palazzo di Carle, gathering intel for an upcoming assassination. When it becomes clear the place is impenetrable, Ezio turns to Leonardo and his experimental flying machine as the solution. Of course, the first test flight is a spectacular failure, forcing Ezio to clear out guard posts so bonfires can be lit in order to create necessary updrafts. Finally, this all culminates in the iconic flying machine mission, where Ezio soars through the skies of Venice before sneaking into the palazzo and assassinating Carlo Grimaldi, just after witnessing him poison the Doge in a cutscene that ramps up the drama. The tailing mission works because it isn't overused in Assassin's Creed 2, and the dialogue between the Templars adds some weight to the story. Scouting the palazzo is another highlight. It actually feels like Ezio is investigating, planning, and preparing for the assassination. Then there's the flying machine mission, easily one of the most iconic moments in the entire game. It's pure spectacle and still stands out years later. Finally, while the assassination of Carlo itself is fairly standard, the cutscene leading up to it, watching the Doge being poisoned, really elevates the sequence and adds gravity to the moment. If there's one downside, it's Carlo himself. As a target, he's just not that interesting or memorable, but honestly there are so many positives here that it hardly matters. At number 1, we have what I think is the best sequence in Assassin's Creed 2, the Pazzi Conspiracy. This is the point where the game's story truly explodes into high gear. Ezio meets La Volpe, the sly and mysterious thief who quickly becomes one of the standout allies in the game. Things then escalate when Ezio uncovers a Templar meeting between the Santa Maria Novella, revealing the scale of the conspiracy. The plot reaches its peak with the infamous attack on the Medici brothers. Giuliano is brutally assassinated outside of the Duomo, while Lorenzo barely escapes thanks to Ezio's intervention. The sequence wraps up with Ezio tracking down Francesco de Pazzi, killing him in the streets, and his corpse being put on public display, sending a chilling message. There are so many things I love about this sequence. Firstly, meeting La Volpe is a highlight. He's one of my favourite characters in the entire game because of how mysterious and enigmatic he is. The build up throughout the sequence is masterful, giving each mission weight and significance instead of just throwing Ezio into random fights. Of course, the assassination of the Medici brothers is the standout moment. Not only is it the most memorable event in the game for me, but the fact that it actually happened in real life makes it even more powerful. Honestly, this mission sparks my own interest in reading upon the real history of the Patsy conspiracy. I also like how the combat here feels purposeful. Instead of endless waves of enemies, the fighting ties directly into the chaos of the assassination attempt. And then there's the assassination of Francesco de Pazzi itself, which is one of my favourites in the game. It's dark, it's gritty, and the cutscene after Ezio kills him perfectly captures the brutality and consequences of this moment in history. And there we have it, every sequence in Assassin's Creed 2 ranked from worst to best. Please let me know down in the comments your opinions. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.